What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is August 18th, 2025, about 3:50 p.m. where I'm at right now. And we are continuing our 13th book in our Book to React series. This is episode 22 of Black Bolshevik Autobiography of an Afro-American Communist, written by Harry Haywood Hall, a man who was born from slaves in South Omaha, Nebraska in 1898, and he died unfortunately on January 4th, 1985. We read this book to celebrate his legacy and also to remember this man and learn from his life, and so many things I find fascinating in this book. I feel a deep connection to Harry because so many things in his life overlap with mine, being interested in radical leftist politics, being a person who traveled all across the world, being a man who was married twice, even though he got me one up. He got married 3 times. Being a man who thought deeply and cared about other people, being a true internationalist in the truest sense of the word. So there's so many things I gained from this book, and I'm very fortunate to have found the time and made the effort and made the sacrifice. I could be making money right now. I could be doing so many other things, but I'm out here on live reading the book for free for everyone out here to gain knowledge and also to dissect the text as they wish. Shout out to Kamal up in the chat. He gave me £1. Shout out to Kamal, and everybody else is going to join the live stream. If you want to get this book, which is hard to find in actual print version, you can go to libcom.org, download the attachment, click PDF. You can also go on marxist.org right here and get the book right here. But if you want that physical copy, it's going to run you about $40 paperback or close to $700 hardcover if you get this on Amazon. So this is why we read these books, to make this accessible to the people, and also to keep these rare books also out there in the public format as well. And as we live during a time of rising fascism and the right wing on the march all across the world, it's very important that we hear from the voices of people who fought against fascism, literally put their lives on the line to fight against fascism. As we read in the chapter before, Harry went to Spain to actually fight for the freedom of people there who were fighting against the fascist takeover of their government. But we're on chapter 20 right now, and we only have 2. We only have 2 more chapters left. Only 2 more chapters left in this 700-page book. Today we will be reading Browder's Treachery, and this is a very long chapter, so we might be on live for about 2.5 hours or so reading. So grab a snack, get something to drink, or save this for later. Download this and play it back on 2x, however you listen to these podcasts. So without further ado, let's jump into chapter 20, Browder's Treachery. And for people that don't know, Browder was the leader of the CPUSA. He was a extreme revisionist. He dissolved the Communist Party before he was kicked out because he believed that, after the defeat of the Nazis and the fascists during World War II, that now we were going to enter a golden age. We were going to enter a golden age where the communists could collaborate with the liberal establishment order to actually bring about workers' rights and the full emancipation of the individual. But Browder absolutely was delusional. He was delulu, as Gen Z likes to say. Without further ado, chapter 20, Browder's Treachery. When I arrived in New York in early September 1945, I went directly to party headquarters on East 13th Street. The receptionist informed me that Foster was expected at any moment and told me to have a seat. A few minutes later, Foster appeared looking haggard and tired. I rushed to greet him with a warm, "Hello, Bill." He looked up, a frown crossing his face as he extended a cold, limp hand. "Hello, Harry. What are you doing here? I thought you were out on the coast." "I just got in from 6 months in the Pacific," I explained. "I came east to see what the party wants me to do in this fight against Browderism, what my assignment should be." His frown deepened. "You had trouble in New York, you had trouble in Baltimore, you had trouble in California. Now I suppose you've come here to make some more trouble," he said accusingly. I was taken aback, flabbergasted, but before I could protest, he snapped, "I don't have time to talk now. I've got a meeting. You'll have to come back later." He turned and strode away. Now, what William Z. Foster is referring to, and that's who he's talking to, William Z. Foster, great labor organizer and radical communist as well. Basically, when Harry went to Spain to fight against the fascists, people called him a coward because he wasn't there on the front line to get killed with everybody else who got slaughtered in his platoon, essentially. And Harry gave a good reason why he wasn't there on the front line, but the people in the party didn't want to hear it. He got kicked out of the Politburo. He was no longer a career communist, and essentially he started working like odd jobs. He started working on ships, sailing across the world. He joined a merchant marine union. He did a little bit of party organizing in New York and Baltimore and California, but that never worked out. So at this point in Harry's life, he's sort of become adrift. He's become the black sheep, pun intended, or he became the black sheep in the CPUSA. So that's why William Z. Foster's treating him that way. Continuing here. Stunned by the brush off, I left the office. I didn't know what to make of it. Foster had never been a warm person, but he had always been friendly to me before. I guessed that this cold reception reflected a change in the internal party situation. The emergency convention to reconstitute the party had taken place a little over a month before, and undoubtedly the new national board had discussed the party cadre. I suspected Foster's remarks reflected a hostile attitude on the part of the new leadership toward me. I decided to find out what was going on. Throughout the war, I had been pretty much out of touch with the developments in the party and felt strongly it was time to get back into things. When I discussed the party situation with friends, I found most were dissatisfied with the manner in which the struggle against Browderism was being conducted. But it was not until a decade later that I and other comrades were able to fully understand the effect of Browderism on the party. Much of the history of the struggle against Browder's revisionist line has been obscured by distorted and self-serving interpretations written by right opportunist and professional anti-communist. I want to trace this history as I now see it, from the point of view of the left, that is, the tendency which fought for a Marxist-Leninist line against the revisionism of the time. Much of the analysis of the inter-party struggles of those fateful war and immediate post-war years, of course, benefits from hindsight. Browder's revisionism first appeared as a rounded-out theory in a speech he delivered in Bridgeport, Connecticut on December 12, 1943. Its fullest ideological expression was in his book, Tehran, Our Path to War and Peace, published just a few months later. Browder's theories were a systematic set of revisionist concepts which promoted collaboration with and accommodation to the imperialist ruling class. It led to a series of right opportunist policies which culminated in the liquidation of the Communist Party. Browder's theory departed from the time-tested principles of revolutionary class struggle basic to Marxism-Leninism. His views emphasized liberal reformist reforms of struggle and left the party tailing after the bourgeoisie, eventually abandoning entirely the road to revolution. Browder drew upon the Tehran Agreement, a pact hammered out between Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin in December 1943, establishing unity among the Allied powers in World War II and opening the Second Front. He transformed concepts of an international and diplomatic character, important in the war against fascist Germany, into a full-fledged domestic program. Browder declared that a harmony of interest had been established between labor and capital. He called for a new national unity to bring full employment, peace, and an end to periodic economic crises. He boasted that he was even willing to welcome J.P. Morgan into this grand coalition and clasp his hand on that and join with him to realize it. He promised that the communists will not raise the issue of socialism in such a form and manner as to endanger or weaken that national unity, and assured the ruling class that his program was consistent with the fullest possible expansion of consumption by the wealthy and the accumulation of their private incomes. I feel like Browder was compromised, like the CIA sent that check. That Cash App landed. You get what I'm saying? And because I can't understand how you reach these types of conclusions. I would work with J.P. Morgan. The capitalist class can continue to reap in more profits and benefits to themselves. Like, what type of communist would say that? The starting point of his new national unity was to continue operating the American economy at full capacity, as during the war, by seeking foreign markets equal to the war market. He proposed giant industrial development corporations of government and business, which would extend credit to and invest in the devastated and underdeveloped areas of the world, thus creating generations to right opportunism in America. These included A. American exceptionalism, which saw capitalism in the United States as exempt from the Marxist laws of growth and decay, which govern the capitalist world, abandoning all class analysis of bourgeois democracy. What? Browder put forward the view that communism is 20th century Americanism. B. Fundamental overestimation of the power and stability of American imperialism, which led to the conclusion that revolutionary struggle for socialism was impossible. C. Basic great nation chauvinism, which opposed the oppressed and colonized people's struggles for liberation from the yoke of imperialism and instead portrayed the imperialist ruling class as the bearers of prosperity and democracy. D. The view that the United States would enter a period of class harmony, a long post-war period of class peace, during which time progress and prosperity could be achieved within the framework of the free enterprise system. E. Browder's belief that blacks had achieved full equality through peaceful development of capitalism and abandonment of the right of self-determination. Browder believed that black people had already exercised the historic right of self-determination and opted for integration into the country as a whole. Everything he's saying sounds crazy. I cannot imagine the leader of the Communist Party essentially becoming a Democrat. Like, what is all of this? Not even a Democrat, like a like a full right-wing Republican. That's crazy. Everything there is just like insane. I cannot imagine. Okay. Sulani Du Bois says, "Yeah." Shout out to Sulani Du Bois. He's a new member in the chat. Shout out to Sulani. I saw your comment, Sulani, saying FBA versus quote-unquote FBA. I would like for you to explain what you meant by that in a previous video. But nevertheless, shout out to Kareth J. He says, "Unfortunately, not able to watch in real time, but will watch later. Thank you for your labor." I appreciate that, Kareth J. It takes a lot of effort to do this. You know, I sacrifice work and opportunities to come on here and read, but it's for the people. It's the least I could do for the cause. But anyway, continuing here. The logical conclusion of Browder's principles was his contention that the Communist Party, a revolutionary vanguard party based on Marxist-Leninist principles, was no longer appropriate for American conditions. It should be replaced by a political association which worked for reforms within the prevailing two-party system of the United States. This is precisely what was done in May 1944 when the party was dissolved and the Communist Political Association created in its place. Browder's revisionist line had not developed overnight. His Tehran thesis was only the latest expression of a rightist trend that had been developing within the party for several years. The origins of Browderism can be traced to his distortion of the United Front policy of the 7th Congress in 1935 of the Comintern. This Congress had called on communists to build broad united front movements of peoples, governments, and parties to defeat fascism where it had come to power and to prevent its spread to other countries. But the Congress had also explicitly warned against the danger of reducing the independent and revolutionary role of the communist parties within such fronts. Despite these warnings from the Communist International, the CPUSA slipped into serious rights reformist distortions of the United Front policy under Browder's leadership. Browder led the retreat from the principles of class struggle, which affected all areas of the party's mass work. So basically what he's trying to say here is like, you know, the communists said, we're going to work with the social democrats. We're going to work with, you know, the left wing of the liberal bourgeoisie establishment. But, you know, Browder said, okay, if we're going to work with them, we might as well become them. I mean, you know what I mean? I guess Mama's sayings are true. You know, you are who your friends are. And Browder decided, you know, my friends are really right-wing Republicans. I'm sorry. I'm going to continue here. The party's work in the Black Liberation Movement felt the first effects of this retreat. Scarcely a year after the 7th Congress called on communists to strengthen their own ranks and maintain the initiative within the United Front, the U.S. Party moved to liquidate a main revolutionary strongpoint of its work in the South, the militant and communist-led Sharecroppers Union. And Sharecroppers Union sounds so hard, too. I would join the Sharecroppers Union even if I worked as a cashier at Dollar General. That's such a cool name. I can't believe the party got rid of so many, like, cool organizations. You know what I mean? Like the Sharecroppers Union and other, like, black-centered clubs and groups. Anyway. In the years that had followed my visit to Alabama, the Sharecroppers Union had continued to grow. In 1936, it had a membership of roughly 10,000, spread over 5 counties in the Alabama Black Belt. It was growing throughout the lower South with 2,500 members in Mississippi, Georgia, Louisiana, and North Carolina. But in October 1936, the SCU was dissolved and its membership merged into the Agricultural Workers Union and the Farmers Union of Alabama. This latter was an organization of predominantly small white farm owners and tenants based in the northern part of the state, outside the plantation area. This union was strongly influenced by the racist and right-wing Coughlinite forces. Okay. All right. Sulani Du Bois says, okay, FBA versus FBA, quote unquote, is a concept I was thinking of, that FBAs need to have a clean break towards community activism and working class politics rather than the current trend of FBA as a site of reaction. I 1000% agree with that. And I've been meaning to make these videos. I just have not had the time to post other videos on my channel. But I think the FBA movement is vitally important. But it could be done without the xenophobia, without the jingoism, without the, pussyfooting or paddling towards the far right in American politics. I think the FBA, what you exactly said, Sulani Du Bois, I 1000% agree with. Like, the FBA movement could be done in the idea that, yeah, we're descendants of people, we have a lineage tied to American slavery, American chattel slavery. But that doesn't mean that we hate immigrants now. That doesn't mean that we, say, yeah, we're not going to vote. We're not going to be a part of the electoral process. There's so many things. I agree with you there, Sulani Du Bois. But let's continue here. In retrospect, I believe that those responsible for liquidating the Sharecroppers Union were motivated by a sort of crude trade union economism, a desire to restrict the struggle of black soil tillers to economic issues, as if this were possible, and a feeling that the existence of an independent and mainly black union with the explosive potential of the Sharecroppers Union would frighten off our new Democratic Front allies, the Roosevelt New Dealers, the Southern Moderates, and the CIO leadership. As Camp Hill, Reeltown, and Dadeville amply demonstrated, even the smallest move to change the status quo could lead to armed conflict. I don't know what those references are. Maybe those were black towns where people tried to move into all white neighborhoods or something. I don't know, like, what those references are. Anyway, in fact, any demand to give blacks a voice in determining sharecropping conditions or wages was essentially revolutionary, as it threatened the existing setup. One could almost hear the opportunists sighing with relief upon the union's dissolution. I recall in the late 30s listening to a garbled report by one of our agrarian specialists in which he tried to explain the reason for the move. The problem of black soil tillers in the Deep South was just a part of the general agricultural problem, a matter of getting blacks and whites together against the common enemy. The Sharecroppers Union, with its militant program mainly emphasizing black grievances, had become an obstacle to the unity of black and white Southern farmers. I took issue with this chauvinist position, pointing out that it contained a crass underestimation of the national character of the struggle of the black peasantry in the South. I expressed surprise to hear, 10 years after the adoption of our revolutionary line on the Afro-American question, what amounted to reiteration of the old social democratic position, which ignored the special position of blacks in the name of unity. The problem of the black peasantry in the South was not exactly the same as that of the poor white farmers in the South or in the rest of the country. It was a struggle against semi-slave conditions reinforced by racist barbarism, and in the long run, for the completion of the land revolution left in default by the betrayal of Reconstruction. The Sharecroppers Union had represented a renewal of that struggle, a struggle that required special forms and methods of organization and its own leadership. But by 1936, the Union was dead, and a grievous blow had been struck against the movement in the South. In the face of the fiercest repression, a sizable party organization with an active Young Communist League, ILD, and remarkably high political development had been built in the Black Belt. When the party backed down from the SCU, the whole party structure began to atrophy. By the end of 1943, all the major party concentrations in the South were formally dissolved and replaced by non-communist education and press associations. So basically what he's saying is like when the communists abandoned black people, everything sort of like fell apart. Briefly, during this right-wing turn under Browderism, basically the communists said, hey, enough with that black stuff, black self-determination, black nationhood, none of that. Like, we need to get rid of that. And you know what we need to do? We need to move towards the center. Because a great way to get communists in office is to move towards the center. Ain't that right? Anyway, despite such backsliding, the party entered the war period with a reputation as a leading fighter for equality and black liberation. Yet as Browder's line developed, it continually pushed us into a position of tailing after black reformist leadership. In the 30s, the Communist Party had often been looked upon as the party of the Negro people. In the 40s, however, our line led to repeated betrayals of the struggle. For a broad assortment of black reformists, it was just the opportunity they had been waiting for. Still smarting from defeat in the Scottsboro campaign, they jumped in to fill the tremendous void left by our retreat. When A. Philip Randolph called for a dramatic march on Washington to protest discrimination, the party leadership backed away from the issue and urged unity in the face of the fascist enemy. The party declared that the march would create confusion and dangerous moods in the ranks of the Negro people. Black newspapers and the NAACP popularized the mass slogan of the Double V, victory over Hitler abroad and victory over Jim Crow at home. But the party leadership rejected the slogan on the grounds that it detracted from the war effort. That's the first time he put an exclamation mark in the text. That's how I know Harry is pissed. He is pissed. He is flabbergasted that the party that once stood for kill the Boer, take the land back, all that stuff is now saying even double V is too radical. Victory over Hitler and victory over Jim Crow is too radical for the Communist Party. In the 1940s? Are you serious? What happened? Damn, homie. In high school, you was the man, homie. What the fuck happened to you? Occasionally, the Browder revisionists would give lip service opposition to discrimination and segregation in the armed forces. When it came down to a concrete situation, however, their support was considerably less vigorous. For example, 4 black WACs at Fort Devens, Massachusetts, were court-martialed for protesting their commanding officer's demand that they should do all the dirty work. Outraged, churches, unions, newspapers, and civil rights organizations quickly organized and forced the army to reverse itself. The party leadership, however, reprimanded the WACs. Ben Davis stated, "The U.S. General Staff has on many occasions proved that they deserve the full confidence of the Negro people. We cannot temporarily stop the war until all questions of discrimination are ironed out." The slogan of the right of self-determination was officially dropped in 1944, but it was clear that the revolutionary line it symbolized had been suppressed for some years. James Ford explained the new perspectives for black equality to the party. He stated that the economic expansion which Tehran promised would open up the South for unprecedented development that will raise the standard of living for the degradation and poverty which have held back the entire Southern people. According to Ford, not only would reactionary Southern congressmen be driven from office under such conditions, but American democracy as a whole will be strengthened, and the Negro people will be fully integrated into our American society. These advances will be irrevocably secured, providing the Democratic win-the-war forces, including the Negro people, stand solidly behind our Commander-in-Chief. Wow. Sulani Du Bois is saying crazy work. Everything here is just taking me aback. Like, I could not imagine. Like, I understand World War II was like a dramatic war, carnage at a level we couldn't have seen, mass industrialization at a pace we can't imagine now today. But I couldn't imagine being so caught up in the mix that you start thinking, yeah, now that we defeated the Nazis, the Americans are now on our side. The liberal establishment order is now on our side. That's crazy. All right. Arthur Sage says, FBA ain't stopping shit. Recently in Philly, youth trade school students went to Ghana and help out build shelters. That's dope. That's dope to hear. Shout out to Arthur Sage jumping in the chat. But it's good to hear that young black Americans, anybody, is going to Africa and helping the development of the people there. So that's dope to hear. But I'm going to continue here. The party's work in the trade union movement also suffered from Browder's opportunist distortions of the United Front. In 1939, the party dissolved its system of trade union fractions, factory nuclei, and shop papers as a concession to the CIO's leadership, a move which seriously weakened the party's strength in basic industry. This move also accentuated the tendency to hide the party's face. In the UAW and TWUA, Textile Workers Union of America, the party retreated from situations where it had the support to elect one or more of its members to leadership and supported other candidates. During World War II, the party supported the No Strike Pledge. While it was a generally correct policy for the situation, the party refused to fight for reciprocal pledges from business to curb war profiteering and ensure the workers' standard of living. Browder opposed any struggle to extract such agreement from business, viewing them as a disruption to war production. He attacked slogans like equality of sacrifice, which was being raised by some party trade unionists, as stemming from narrow factional considerations. Thus, the party found itself tailing behind the labor bureaucrats on the day-to-day issues of safety, speed up, and overtime pay for overtime work. Browder's revisionist theories extended into the field of foreign policy, resulting in nothing less than his approval of American imperialism. He argued that the peoples of Latin America should place their trust in the Roosevelt administration and the continuance of the good neighbor policy. He urged the Chinese communists to trust America, and in 1945 openly endorsed U.S. foreign policy as pressing toward the unity and democratization of China. Browder abandoned support for the struggles of the oppressed and colonized peoples, arguing that they should rely on the good intentions of the great nations to gain their liberation. This is insane, bro. I'm pulling, oh my God. I could not imagine. Like the communists in the 1940s, it feels like this was the beginning of the end. And this explains a lot to like where we are now with the American left. Because the American left, it seems like at this point was just like, with the New Deal, with the defeat of fascism, guys, we're set. We made it. We got Social Security. Maybe we'll get free healthcare soon. Maybe we don't need to strike. We don't need to unionize. We don't need to, propagate our message to the workers through our newspapers and publications. This is insane. And then also to say like, the people of Latin America, who America has bullied since the beginning. America has bullied the people of Latin America since the beginning, killed their leaders, forced our industries into their countries and shit like that. Browder is saying like, Argentines, Colombians, Panamanians, trust America, bro. We got you. That's crazy. This is insane. The ascendancy of Browder's revisionism was based upon both objective and subjective factors within the party. Objectively, bourgeois ideology had long penetrated the working class movement in the United States, had been nurtured during the reformist years of the Roosevelt era, and had thrived in an atmosphere of inadequate Marxist-Leninist training of party members and leaders. The liquidation of shop units and trade union fractions greatly weakened the party's base among the industrial workers and weakened the leading role of the proletariat within the Communist Party. Combined with the large influx of professionals and white-collar workers, this greatly broadened the social base for revisionism in the party. The situation was further aggravated by the leadership's ousting of some 4,000 party members who were foreign-born because of a desire to Americanize the party. What? Basically, the Communist Party went through a MAGA phase. This all sounds like a big MAGA phase caused by one man. Was Browder like the Trump of the Communist Party? Was that? This is crazy. This chauvinist move turned away many of the most experienced and ideologically steeled U.S. communists from party activities. All right, Sulani Du Bois says he's like a modern-day small Democrat, CPUS member, but on crack. I wouldn't say Democrat. Small D Democrat, I guess. Okay, I thought you meant uppercase D. Sorry, yeah. But yeah, I think this is like straight-up Republican shit, like straight-up right-wing, you know what I mean? Like, I can't believe this. There's two sides to a story, of course. We should probably read some Browder and find out what Browder was thinking if this is, actually what happened or if this is how Harry is framing it. But the way it's sounding, this is nasty work. This is like this is like if you put Ted Cruz in charge of the Republican Party, you would get these results. Anyway, finally, a distortion of democratic centralism developed inside the party under Browder's leadership. Democratic discussion, collective leadership, criticism and self-criticism, and ideological struggle were abandoned. Browder consolidated an encrusted and entrenched bureaucratic machine under the direction of his chief lieutenant, Eugene Dennis. Democratic centralism gave way to, as V.J. Jerome later put it, dictatorial centralism. Browder himself was glorified as the greatest living American and became increasingly infatuated with contacting influential persons while actually isolating himself from the working class. I have a strong hunch that Browder was an agent. He was a plant. Because, the Communist Party has had infiltrators since the beginning. Since the beginning, the government tried to send as many FBI and informants in there as possible. So, yeah. He's like debuffing your own teammate. Like debuffing your own teammates. Exactly, Sulani. Like, yeah, he's basically, putting Kobe on the bench and letting somebody else play on the B string. Anyway, by May of 1945, however, Browder's visions of an all-class post-war alliance were already beginning to clash with the harsh realities of everyday life. Even before the war ended, layoffs and strikes had occurred in a number of areas. Led by the U.S., the Western Allies made no secret of the fact that their main target in the post-war period would be the Soviet Union and the so-called communist menace it represented. Under such conditions, Duclos's letter had a sensational effect on the membership of the CPUSA. Duclos, by the way, was the leader of the French Communist Party who wrote a strongly worded letter in French style, cursive, handprint, cursive, handwriting, scroll. He basically wrote a letter condemning Browder for what he was doing to the Communist Party. So, upon its publication in May of 1945, the rank and file were plunged into a series of discussions and debates. Discussion bulletins were written and distributed internally. Clubs and whole sections engaged in a heated struggle. It was an honest attack on bureaucracy, and for many, this was the first time they had experienced such open political struggle inside the party. Opposition to Browder gained rapid support and soon resulted in the Emergency Reconstruction Convention, which was held in July of 1945. At this convention, the party was reformed and Browder's opportunism exposed. Threatened by the growing rank-and-file revolt, the party, and especially the leadership, were forced to make self-criticisms. The convention was significant in that it reflected the two trends which were to mark the future history of the party struggles against revisionism. On the one hand, there was the rank and file spurred to action by the Duclos letter, and with it, at least a partial understanding of the seriousness of the party's rightist errors, but as yet without any clearly defined leadership. On the other hand, there was the firmly entrenched Browderite leadership who saw their main task as the squashing of the rank and file upsurge and holding on to their positions at any cost. One day they spouted Browderism, the next day they were repudiating his line, with little genuine self-criticism in between. To me and many of my friends, such self-criticism seemed to be mere breast beating and verbal recantation. It is no wonder, therefore, that there was much skepticism in the ranks as to the ability of the old leadership, particularly of Browder's ex-lieutenants like Eugene Dennis and John Williamson, to successfully wage a struggle against revisionism. The old leadership was carried over almost intact into the newly reconstituted party, but it was precisely these people who controlled the party apparatus. Their main preoccupation at this time was to short-circuit the upsurge of the rank and file, to abort what was most needed at that time, a thorough, open ideological struggle and a period of criticism and self-criticism which would be mainly directed against the right. Almost immediately after the convention, however, the new leadership began to shift the focus of the struggle away from right opportunism to the so-called left sectarian danger. Thus, Browderism was exposed pragmatically in specific manifestations like Tehran, but the revisionist line it represented was never repudiated in a fundamental way. Along with this came a wholesale attack on the left, which is best described by Harrison George, a former editor of the Daily Worker and People's World, the party's West Coast newspaper, in a document titled The Crisis in the CPUSA. Here, George related the draconian measures that were taken against so-called Trotskyites and semi-Trotskyite elements in the party, many of whom were self-proclaimed premature anti-Browderites. As a left opposition grew in strength following the reconstitution of the party, a number of cadres were expelled. Many were veterans, even charter members, who had laid their lives on the line for the party. Such men as Vern Smith, veteran labor writer for the Communist Press, Bill Dunn, an experienced trade union cadre, and at one time the party's representative to the Profintern, as well as Harrison George himself, were expelled. George states that these expulsions were followed by mass expulsions at the local level and the dropping of a number of dissidents. Many clubs were reorganized by national and district level leadership. Some cadres were expelled with an increasingly bureaucratic suppression of party democracy as membership opposition passed over from a passive to an active form. Eventually, all that remained of democratic centralism was centralism. Basically, the party became increasingly bureaucratic. Conspiracy theory here, I just feel like the party was taken over by, the deep state, as they like to say, the intelligence agencies, the alphabet boys is what it sounds like. To me, there's no evidence of that, but I can't explain this drastic right-wing turn, everything that happened here. So a later phase of this struggle began with the National Committee meeting of 1947. This period saw the leadership postpone the National Convention and in so doing refused to submit its policies and programs to the membership for renewal or rejection. The 14th Party Convention was finally held in August of 1948. Undoubtedly, the right felt the need for more time to consolidate its position. Such was the case in the period following the 1945 convention, when they postponed choosing the officers of the National Committee for a year. Party Chairman William Z. Foster. During this period, William Z. Foster rose as the unchallenged leader of the party. In 1945, the rank and file looked to Foster, and Foster alone among the leadership, to reconstitute the party on a truly revolutionary basis. The party was at a crossroads, and Foster's task was a historic one. He had a proud history in the party and the revolutionary working class movement. From his years in the IWW and the Socialist Party, he came into the CP with a wealth of experience in the trade union movement. Foster was a leader of the Great Steel Strike of 1919, which saw some 365,000 workers walk off the job. That's big dog. That's big dog right there. God damn. In the 1920s, he led the struggle against dual unionism and fought for a revolutionary program for work within the unions. The development of the prestigious Trade Union Education League, or TUEL, can be attributed to his leadership. As we have already mentioned, Foster made some rightist errors in this work. Slow to see the need for independent, left-led unions, he later criticized these errors and came to lead the campaign for industrial unionism. He was one of the chief architects of the CIO. But the task he was faced with in 1945, the fight against revisionism, proved to be beyond his capabilities. While Foster was the best of the old leadership, he was certainly no fearless warrior against the right. Even before he was thrust into the leading role in the party, his pragmatism had come to the fore as he consistently put political expediency ahead of ideological struggle. I just gotta say, as leftists, we have to be able to love, we have to love to fight. You have to love to fight right-wing fascists, like explicitly right-wing fascists, but also revisionists is what it sounds like to me. You have to love to, draw that line in the sand, to differentiate, to say they not like us. You get what I mean? I can't understand the frame of mind to be like, yo, we have to have party cohesion above all else. Like, it's the Communist Party, guys. Like, come on now. It's the Communist Party that you're trying to keep together. This isn't the Democrats. This isn't the Republicans, where it's a large, major national organization. Like, yeah, it's the Communist Party, and there are chapters and clubs everywhere, but it's a small handful of people that, that you're appealing to. You get what I'm saying? like try to make the party as pure as possible to the ideology that is proven to be revolutionary and successful. But I'm going to continue here. So, for example, he and Sam Darcy had been the only two members of the National Board to criticize Browder's line before the fateful arrival of the Duclos letter. In January 1944, he submitted a letter to the National Committee which criticized Browder's line. Duclos himself had liberally quoted Foster, but publication of the letter was suppressed by the National Committee. Foster did nothing for 15 long months, never fought for his line or fought to bring his case to the rank and file. During the pre-convention discussions of 1944, a period which, according to the party constitution, is supposed to be marked by the most open and frank discussions and scrutiny of the party's line, Foster maintained his silence. He presided at the convention in May of 1944, which dissolved the party and then went on to nominate Earl Browder for president of the new Communist Political Association. Just 4 months after his letter criticizing Browder's line. In turn, Foster himself was nominated by Browder to serve as one of the association's vice presidents. At this same convention, Foster chaired the committee which prepared the charges to expel Sam Darcy. Yet Darcy was expelled for espousing in a more active form the same criticism of Browder as Foster expressed in his January letter to the NC. From the beginning of the struggle against Browderism, Foster consistently underestimated the seriousness of the right danger. At the convention to reconstitute the party, he cautioned against overcorrecting the party's past errors, and in this spirit, he swept the whole Browder crowd back into leadership on his coattails. Not only was Foster denying the lessons of the party's most recent period, he actually overlooked the whole historic trend of the working class movement in the United States. From the Socialist Party to Lovestone to Browder, the main deviation had always been right opportunism. For a long time, Foster seemed to think that he could be a buffer between the various factions and groupings in the party without ever having to seriously confront the more rightist elements in the leadership. In reality, this centrist position led him to play a conciliationist role for the right. While paying lip service to the primacy of the right danger, he actually leveled most of his guns at the left. I assumed that his cold reception to me when I returned from the Pacific was because he associated me with the disgruntled left sectarian elements in the party, some of whom, like Bill Dunn, were old friends of mine. In his concluding remarks at the 14th convention of the CPUSA, Foster openly stated that rightism was the main danger facing the party. But he never detailed exactly what the content of these right errors was. At the same time, he informed the membership that our party has had to conduct a fight on two fronts and that there were dangerous leftist moods and leftist renegade grouplets in the party, that this could be seen in the revolts in a number of districts, including New York and California. He was referring to areas where some of the strongest opposition to rightism developed and where many cadre and clubs were either expelled or dropped out. It is clear that Foster considered the threat from the right to be in abeyance once Browder had been removed from leadership. He saw the political struggle to fight to oust Browder as being primary. In effect, he didn't understand the importance of fighting the ideological influence of Browder, which still had a firm grip on the party. What led Foster to so seriously underestimate the right danger and to tacitly accept the expulsion of so many genuine communists? It can be safely asserted that these errors were rooted in his own tendency toward rightism. Like Browder, he underestimated the leading role of the Vanguard Party. In his 1944 letter criticizing Browder's line, there is no mention of the dissolution of the party, another exclamation mark. Foster wrote a postscript to this letter, and the two were published in the July 1945 Political Affairs. In this postscript, Foster said that he had opposed the dissolution of the party at a board meeting, but didn't actively pursue the matter because he thought it was a lost cause. He ends with these words, "So I left the whole question out of my letter to the National Committee. The immediate task, as I saw it, was for me to help to keep the CPA in fact, if not in name, the Communist Party." Foster obviously believed that the party could continue to play a leading role even when it was liquidated organizationally. Again, while Foster correctly criticized Browder for overestimating the progressive aspects of the monopoly capitalists, he himself overestimated the role played by FDR and the liberal-labor combination. In the same letter in which he criticized Browder, Foster writes, "We must understand clearly and definitely that the basic forces of a progressive national unity are those grouped in the main around Roosevelt's banners, and we must fight to help them extend and solidify their ranks." Foster was indeed a product of the times, of a period in the party's history when the attack on Marxist-Leninist theory, rightism, and bureaucracy had seriously undermined the inner workings of the party. In all fairness, it must be said that his ability to lead the party was also greatly affected by his poor health. Following a heart attack in 1932, Foster's activities were seriously limited, and he was forced to spend much of his time at home, removed from the operative leadership of the party. In the final analysis, however, it was his pragmatism, empirical and superficial methods of evaluating conditions in the party and the country, which led him to agree with the main tenets of the right. Most importantly, the possibility of a peaceful transition to socialism. It was this view that the struggle is everything, the final aim, nothing, along with an unwillingness to rock the boat, which most consistently guided his actions. Wow. So he's accusing, the guy who was put in place, who was a seasoned vet in communist organizing and agitation. Even he fell victim to, the rightward turn or revisionism. That's why I think, to some degree, the Communist Party should be led by people that have skin in the game, because Browder and William Z. Foster, no offense, were like white guys and white men. And I think a lot of the times white men, because, of their access to power and privilege, they get to take off their communist lapels and just go outside and be white men and have, the world open to them. But if the CPUSA were led by a woman, if it were led by a gay person, a black person, a person who's marginalized in some way, you'll still have some level of radicalism. I'm not going to say marginalized people can't also be, deluded into believing, bourgeois ideology or right-wing talking. They can't fall victim to right-wing talking points. Of course, that can happen. But, if you're a white guy in 1940s America and America just kicked Nazi ass, you might feel like, hey, guys, we won. We won. But who won? You won, not us. We're still in the struggle. You get what I'm saying? But that's just my little side note. I'm going to continue. His failure to fully break with the right opportunism of Browder with revisionism left the door open for the resurgence of a line which eventually liquidated the Communist Party as a revolutionary vanguard of the working class once and for all. His continued vacillation and conciliation to the right helped to lay the groundwork for the final victory of revisionism in the U.S. Party. It is a sad note that the outstanding leader of the American working class was in the last years of his life putting forward such revisionist theories as the peaceful transition to socialism. No one who lived through the years of 1945 to 1948, with perhaps the exception of Harrison George or a few others, had a full understanding of what was going on in the party at the time. I know that I observed right errors, but I merely saw them as mistakes and tendencies which could be corrected, not as reflecting a whole line that would lead to liquidation of the party. I didn't really trust the leadership, especially Eugene Dennis, though I had little actual personal contact with the man. He seemed to me to be the kind of guy who could never make a direct statement. I knew that he had been Browder's right-hand man and one of the leaders of the whole right deviation. Once all the breast beating was over, he became General Secretary of the party, nominated by Foster. I wondered then how he had managed to weather the change so well. So going to the comments, okay. Solani Du Bois says, I don't totally agree with that, but I understand it. I know, like the leader of a leftist group shouldn't just be based solely on somebody's identity. It should be based on their commitment to the ideology, to the cause, etc. But I think, your identity ties you to some causes more than others. You get what I'm saying? Like, I'm anti-homophobia. I'm anti-LGBTQ discrimination. But as passionately as I feel about it, I will never be as passionate about that as somebody who actually is gay, who is a lesbian, who is trans. You get what I mean? I'm against Islamophobia, and I'm deeply, because I'm a Muslim. You know what I mean? I'm more tied to that. You get what I'm saying? And also black issues I'm more concerned with because, hey, I'm black if you can't tell. You get what I mean? But let me know what you think about that. Sulani Du Bois, if you do genuinely think that success of the capitalist state as successful in yourself, then you may be compromised. I hope you're not talking about. I assume you're talking about the text and not me, because I don't think I said that. But definitely, I think Foster and Browder were thinking that. Kamal says, "I hear you. Sometimes it's only right for the forefront." You get what I mean? Like, are we gonna really? If the NAACP were led by a cadre of white men, would they really be as committed towards fighting against, American apartheid and police brutality and stuff like that? Okay. All right. Sulani Du Bois says, no, not you gay. Okay. All right. No problem. No problem. Hakuna Matata. Let's continue here. So when the struggle first began against Browder in the latter part of 1945, I was withdrawn, still reluctant to become involved in the inter-party struggle. But I had seen an article by Claudia Jones, a young black woman communist from the West Indies, who had challenged Browder's line on the right of self-determination. The article had greatly stimulated my interest. I knew that the ideological struggle inside the party was far from over, and I thought that I could play a role in restoring our position on the Afro-American question. But I was still leery of plunging into the struggle because of the self-doubts that hung over me after my battlefield experiences in Spain and my work in Baltimore. My heart attack also held me back somewhat, and Foster's brush-off had renewed some of the deep personal wounds that I felt. I was therefore somewhat apprehensive when in December 1945, Charles Crumbin, my old Lenin School friend and then district organizer for New York, called me into a meeting. When I arrived, I found in addition to Crumbin, Bob Miner. I had always had warm feelings towards Bob, which I thought were mutual despite his close association with Browder, Steve Nelson, former brigade commissar in Spain, and James Ford, one of the few casualties from among the Browder leadership. Charlie began the meeting by saying that they wanted to discuss my future work and resolve the Spanish problem once and for all. As I recall, he said that he did not believe the rumors that I had left the front without permission, and that Bob and Steve were in Spain and could substantiate this. It seemed to him that the rumors had been irresponsible accusations directed at one of our only leading Negro comrades. One can just look, although it certainly isn't necessary, at Harry's World War II Seaman's record and see that the rumors were not true, he said. He concluded by saying that he felt it was time for all disparaging rumors, none of which were ever made into direct charges, to cease, and that Harry should be encouraged to make the kinds of contributions to the party we all know he is capable of. Bob Miner said a few words along similar lines, and Steve Nelson agreed. Only Ford expressed reservations, but did not make any specific charges. Bob suggested that a restatement and elaboration of a revolutionary position on the Afro-American question was urgently needed. It had been nearly 10 years since such a presentation had been made. I agreed. It seemed to me that there was every indication of a renewed upsurge among blacks, and important struggles were beginning to unfold, which required a clear understanding of the question if the party were to play a leading and decisive role. The rank and file, especially the young black cadres, were aware of the crucial place the question held in the struggle to root out the influence of Browderism. For all these reasons, I anxiously took up the task of writing such a book. I felt at the time that Crumbin and Miner were surely not acting on their own, but rather as a committee of the Politburo set up to investigate the matter. Therefore, I considered this meeting as an official clearance of all the accusations stemming from Spain, and felt free to concentrate all my efforts toward writing the book. For the next 2 years, I spent the major portion of my time working on the manuscript and did a great deal of reading and research while I was still sailing. I had decided then to concentrate on developing an exhaustive examination of the agrarian situation in the South as a basis for the restatement of the correct position on the Afro-American question. So basically what he's referring to is Harry Haywood's famous book that I forgot the title of. It's so famous I can't remember. But essentially he wrote a whole book about why black people should have the right to self-determination. Why black people should take the land back from the white farmers, have the ability to form our own government, our own autonomous state within the United States. He did that as a reaction to the right-wing reactionism that was happening in the party at the time. And all these other, young communists that he's aligning himself with, and people that were kicked out of the party, unfortunately, realized that the party was walking away from black issues. They were walking away from, the traditional view that, the Communist Party stands for black self-determination and death to all lynchers and white chauvinists and white supremacists, that sort of stuff. So that's why he wrote that book, detailing in depth his view why black people should have the right to self-determination in the South. All right, but continuing here. But in the meantime, I still had to earn a living. Belle had come in from Los Angeles and set up a small apartment on West 138th Street. She had gotten a job in a shoe factory, and I decided to sign on another ship. Harry is like 40 years old now at this point, and he has yet to have kids. Now I know this man got a lot of tail. I know he got a lot of tail. Because earlier in the text, he was talking about, yeah, we came back from World War I and we went to a whorehouse in Harlem and stayed there for 3 days. That's nasty work. That's nasty. I could not imagine laying up with these whores for 3 days. You know what I'm saying? That was a different time. I don't even think deodorant sticks were invented then. That shit was musty. Shit smelled like cornflakes, just smashing up all that whore pussy. But the man got married 3 times, sailed all over the world. I'm sure he was dropping meat in various places. Still got no kids. Interesting. Anyway, my boy was a passport bro. Anyway, on to Cuba. In early March 1946, I signed on the motor ship the Coastal Spartan, bound for Havana as a cook and baker. She was a small freighter on the same class as the Turk's Knot, the ship I had sailed on my last voyage to the Pacific. Sulani Du Bois says old heads were freakazoids. Exactly. You wonder why your grandmama got 7 kids. You wonder why, your great-granny had 13 kids. Because they ain't nothing else to do but hump in the dark. Ain't nothing else to do but to hump in the dark. So anyway, Harry said, this was my first trip to Cuba. When we docked in Havana, a young mulatto police sergeant who was in charge of the dock area came aboard. The chief cook, a Filipino, introduced me to him as Sergeant McLaren. This was not the cook's first trip to Havana, and he whispered to me that McLaren was a good fellow. He looks after our people ashore, he confided. And to show our appreciation, we always make sure he gets a couple of pounds of butter, which cost a lot here. The sergeant was a tall, strapping fellow who spoke fluent colloquial English. He explained to me that he spent 2 years in the United States at the Cuban Pavilion of the 1938 World's Fair. Curious, I asked how he got his name. Oh, my old father was a Scotsman, he said, laughing. On hearing that this was my first time in Havana, he offered to show me the city. We walked out on the harbor area and along the Prado, the main street. We sat down at a sidewalk cafe and ordered some food. While we were talking, the sergeant rose and hailed a nattily dressed man with a military bearing. He introduced me as a writer from the U.S., and we exchanged pleasantries. The man passed on, and I asked who he was. Oh, last month he was the chief of police. I don't know what he's doing now. I never liked him. He was a real reactionary, one of the hangovers from Machado's times. A few minutes later, after we had left the cafe, the sergeant stopped to greet another man. When I asked who that was, he said, "Oh, that's our new chief of police." The sergeant seemed to be a progressive fellow, and he had undoubtedly sized me up as a man of the left. As we walked, we proceeded to discuss the current political situation. The period just after the war was one of popular upsurge as the Cubans sought to realize the democratic aims they had fought for in World War II. Grau San Martin's People's Front government was in power, and the Popular Socialist Party, communist-inspired, and led many struggles of the period. It was just prior to the reactionary offensive sparked by the Cold War, which swept Latin America. I told the sergeant that I was a veteran of the Spanish Civil War, and he insisted on taking me to a bar where some Cuban veterans hung out. As we entered, I saw one familiar face, a beautiful black woman who I had met in Valencia. I had known her only slightly. She was actually in the company of the General El Campesino. The story was that she had played quite a role fighting in the trenches against the fascists. Recognizing me at once, she exclaimed, "El Capitan!" We stood at the bar with the sergeant, who seemed to know everybody, and he translated when I needed it. I asked about other Cuban-Spanish Civil War veterans. I had met a few, but I had forgotten their names. Most had transferred from the 15th Brigade to Campesinos Brigade after Jarama. Out in the street again, I thanked the sergeant and asked if he could direct me to the Communist Party headquarters. Not only would he direct me, he said, but he would be an honor for him to escort me. We walked up a main boulevard along the bay and stopped to look at the statue of Antonio Maceo on horseback. Maceo had been a black leader in the War of Independence against Spain. A few blocks further on, we came to the headquarters of the Popular Socialist Party. It was located in what appeared to be an old mansion. We entered the door, which opened into a large foyer. There were large stairways apparently leading up to offices on the second floor, but the stairs were blocked off by a barricade. Behind it were a few husky-looking young security guards. They seemed to know the sergeant, who told them, "This is Comrade Haywood from the American Party. He wants to see Blas." One of them picked up the phone and repeated the message finally. Repeated the message. Finally, he turned and motioned us up the stairs. We went as directed and entered an open door where Blas Roca, the general secretary of the party, was standing behind a desk. He shook my hand and also the sergeant's, whom he seemed to know. Roca was a light brown mulatto, as I recall, of short and stocky build. Sit down, he said. He said that he had heard of me and asked about James Ford, whom he knew. Ford had attended a Congress of the Cuban Party as a fraternal delegate several years before. I told him that Ford had struck too long with Browder and was not in the new leadership. Yes, we were also stuck with Browder, but he got unstuck before you comrades did, he said. That's funny, old Cuban humor. Yes, we were also stuck with Browder, but we got unstuck before you comrades did. He then asked about Foster. I told him what I honestly thought at the time, that Foster seemed to be all right, and that under his leadership we were finally pulling out the revisionist swamp. We continued talking, and he told me about the situation in Cuba, how the party had come through the revisionist period more or less intact, and that they were now in an uneasy alliance with Grau San Martin. It was getting shaky, however. We're under no illusions, Roca told me. With the war ended, we're expecting a reactionary offensive. He also asked about our work among blacks. I told him that despite the backsliding with Browder, the party's prestige remained high among blacks. There's a debate going on now, and we're looking forward to restoring our position. After we had talked for about an hour, I felt that I had taken enough of his time and rose to leave. Be sure to give my greetings to Foster, Roca said in closing. The sergeant and I walked back to the docks to sightsee along the Prado and taking the nightlife of Havana. The ship pulled out the next day for Matanzas, the sugar port in Orient province, where he loaded sugar on the States. The ship docked in Jersey City on April 2nd, 1946. Man been everywhere. Australia, Cuba, Netherlands, South Africa, Russia. Man been everywhere. Man, I need to get my passport stamped. I need to put some tattoos on my pages, for real. Because man been everywhere. Man, how you bounce around to Cuba, bro? Before the revolution. Sounds like the left was very active in Cuba before Fidel and them. Anyway, we're going to continue here. This is a long chapter, by the way. I'm letting everybody know this is a very long chapter, and we're fighting to get this done. Take a swig of water real quick. All right. Sorry about the lighting if y'all want to see my handsome face. We got, the sunlight outside, so it like oscillates sometimes. Anyway, the fight for our revolutionary line. On my return, I began hearing more and more about the attack on the left and rumors about old friends of mine who were under attack. From what I could see, all was not well with the party, nor was the rank and file satisfied with our course of the struggle against Browderism. To me, the one bright spot in all this was the struggle to reaffirm our revolutionary position on the black national question, for the party to once again take up the fight for the right of self-determination in the Black Belt. I followed this whole question very closely, and it was clear to me that the impetus came mainly from the black cadres and particularly from the new blood that had come into the party in the last decade. At that time, blacks made up 15% of party membership. Despite Browder's liquidationist policies, the party still maintained its reputation as a leader in the struggle for Negro rights. I felt that this was largely due to the outstanding reputation the party had built for itself during the campaigns of the 30s, Scottsboro, the ILD, the unemployed councils, and its yeoman work in building the CIO and organizing the unorganized. The party maintained its fighting reputation through much of the war, despite the opportunist errors that were made. During the 30s and 40s, this was the basis for the recruitment of large numbers of outstanding young blacks who quickly matured as leaders at every level of the party and the mass movements. This core of black cadres was further strengthened by the return of black veterans who are acutely aware of the gains made during the course of the war and of how these gains were now being threatened. These cadres played a leading role in the working class struggle, and their role in the party's strong fight for seniority rights after the war was particularly important. The layoffs in the late 40s had a harsh effect on black workers, many of whom first entered industry during the war and were often the lowest in seniority. A spontaneous Black Caucus movement arose in those years as the top leadership of both the AFL and the CIO steadfastly refused to take up the special demands of black workers. In 1951, these caucuses united into a national organization, the National Negro Labor Councils. Such struggles deeply affected the cadres and reflected the rising sense of struggle and militancy of black people in general. I myself was very much aware of this new spirit. When my ship first docked, I spent a lot of time walking the streets of Harlem. I was struck with the visible optimism on the faces of the people passing me in the street. Black people would no longer be cowed and bullied by Jim Crow. They had experienced a mass political awakening as a result of their wartime experiences, and this was reflected in their manner. The war served to break the historic isolation of the Afro-American people from the struggles of the peoples of the world. Black men and women served over 1 million strong in the armed forces, and the wartime expansion of industry saw an unprecedented number of blacks, close to 1 million workers, come into the U.S. labor force. Through such involvement, black people were able to see more than ever that they had allies in the colonially oppressed people abroad and in the U.S. working class at home in their struggle against Jim Crow and monopoly capitalism. All right, very interesting stuff here. I just got to make sure. Let's see how long we have in this section. All right, what we're going to do, we're going to break this section up. We're going to break up chapter 2 into parts and bits, and we will read this last section because this is just one long section here that I don't think we can get through. I just can't get through it today. I can't get through it today. This is quite a long read. I can't get through it. I'm feeling a bit tired. I've been overworking myself. So we're going to pick up here. Next time we read, yeah. Okay. All right, we're going to pick up on page 549 in our next reading. Sorry, I just got to tap out. I'm tapping out, guys. I hate to let you down, but we'll probably finish up this section possibly later today. I'll probably just pick up reading after my class. I just got to get I just got to get my bearings again. So thank you to everybody who showed up to the live stream. Shout out to Sulani Du Bois. Shout out to Kamal. Shout out to Arthur Sage. Shout out to Kareth J. And everybody who's enjoying the reading. We will pick up with our next one. We're just going to jump right in on page 549. I'm going to pick up on page 549 possibly later today. Y'all be easy out there, and peace.